The mind is supposed to be what experiences reality, yet quantum physics suggests it may also be what creates it. At the smallest scales of existence, particles do not have definite positions, velocities, or even identities until they are observed. The famous double-slit experiment reveals this with merciless clarity. When unmeasured, an electron behaves like a wave, existing in many places at once. When measured, it chooses one. Reality itself appears to hinge on the act of observation. But what performs that observation? A machine? A detector? Or the conscious mind that knows the result? Some interpretations of quantum mechanics, from Wigner to von Neumann, imply that the final collapse of the wave function may require consciousness, not as a metaphor, but as a physical event. Awareness, in this view, does not arise from matter. It finalizes it. If this is true, the mind is not a passenger in the universe. It is a fundamental part of its architecture. Each act of perception becomes a physical intervention in the fabric of possibility itself. The observer is not separate from the observed. Both are locked in a feedback loop that gives rise to existence. The paradox is unavoidable. Physics, the discipline built to eliminate subjectivity, now points to consciousness as the very mechanism that makes the physical world real. Reality may not exist until it is known. In the language of quantum mechanics, every system is described by a wave function, a mathematical object that encodes all possible states it can occupy. Before observation, a particle isn't here or there. It exists as a superposition of possibilities. Only when it is measured does one outcome become real, and all others vanish. This sudden reduction of infinite potential into a single fact is called the collapse of the wave function. The collapse, however, is not part of the mathematical equations themselves. Schrödinger's equation predicts smooth, deterministic evolution. No collapse, no jump, no decision. Yet in experiments, when an observation occurs, probabilities solidify into certainties. Something external to the formalism seems to choose what becomes actual. The equations describe what could happen. The act of observation decides what does. This raises a silent but seismic question. What counts as an observation? A detector triggering a signal? A computer recording data? Or must there be a conscious awareness of the outcome for reality to finalize? Physicists like John von Neumann argued that measurement chains always end in consciousness, that no matter how many instruments intervene, the collapse is incomplete until an observer becomes aware. In his framework, the mind is the ultimate measuring device. This idea terrifies physicists because it places subjectivity inside objective science. It suggests that the boundary between quantum uncertainty and classical reality might pass through awareness itself. The physical world could be the shadow cast by observation, a projection of mind upon probability. And yet, every experiment confirms the same pattern. Reality stays undecided until interaction occurs, and once observed, the quantum fog clears instantly. The universe behaves as if it waits for knowledge. The paradox deepens, because if consciousness finalizes reality, then physics must describe not a world outside the mind, but one that requires it. The observer is no longer optional. It is woven into the act of existence itself. To understand what this means, we must confront the unsettling possibility that the universe, at its most fundamental level, might be conscious, not because it thinks, but because it knows. When physicists realized that measurement seemed to decide reality, they did what science always does when confronted with the impossible. They invented interpretations. Each promised to explain how a probabilistic wave could turn into a single, solid event without appealing to mind or magic. Yet every path led back to the same quiet enigma. Who or what is doing the observing? The Copenhagen interpretation, championed by Niels Bohr and Werner Heisenberg, insisted that quantum mechanics doesn't describe reality itself, only our knowledge of it. Before measurement, questions like, where is the particle, have no meaning. The act of observation does not reveal a property. It creates it. Consciousness isn't explicitly invoked, yet the theory's logic already centers on the observer's limits. Reality becomes epistemic, a structure of information conditioned by observation. Then came the many worlds interpretation, proposed by Hugh Everett. It rejects collapse entirely. Every quantum possibility it claims actually occurs, in a branching multiverse of parallel realities. Observation doesn't select one outcome. It separates the observer into many versions, each witnessing a different branch. In this view, consciousness doesn't collapse reality. It multiplies it. You don't choose the world. You divide into all of them. Others, like Eugene Wagner, return to the unsettling original question. Perhaps consciousness is not an after effect, but a causal force. If the wave function represents potential experience, then awareness might be what converts potential into actuality. Reality, in this interpretation, is a continuous dialogue between matter and mind, each completing the other. David Bohm, seeking order beneath chaos, proposed a hidden variable model. Particles are guided by an unseen pilot wave. Yet even here, the paradox persists. The pilot wave behaves like an information field, a kind of cosmic awareness structuring matter from below. The universe seems to know how to coordinate itself faster than light. Every attempt to exile consciousness from quantum theory ends up reintroducing it under another name: information, correlation, entanglement, awareness. The equations remain intact, but the meaning escapes them, slipping towards something that feels disturbingly alive. The mind may not just observe the universe. It may be the mechanism by which the universe observes itself. The paradox would be easy to dismiss if it lived only in philosophy, but it doesn't. Quantum experiments continue to behave as if awareness bends the rules of space and time. The deeper we probe, the clearer the pattern becomes. The act of knowing seems to rewrite what has already happened. In 1978, physicist John Archibald Wheeler proposed the delayed choice experiment. Imagine firing a single photon through a double slit. If you measure which slit it passes through, it behaves like a particle. If you don't, it behaves like a wave, interfering with itself. Wheeler's twist was diabolical. What if the decision to measure is made after the photon has already passed the slits? The result is absurd. The photon behaves as if it knew in advance whether it would be observed, adjusting its past accordingly. Observation in the present appears to determine the past. The quantum eraser pushes this even further. When information about a photon's path is erased after detection, the interference pattern, supposedly lost, mysteriously returns. Knowledge itself, not physical contact, defines what is real. It's as if the universe keeps multiple versions of reality on standby, waiting for consciousness to decide which one to publish. Then comes entanglement, Einstein's spooky action at a distance. Two particles created together remain linked no matter how far apart they travel. Measure one, and the other instantly knows how to respond, even across galaxies. The effect defies relativity's limit on signal speed. What connects them isn't force or matter, but information, an invisible unity that transcends space. Across all these experiments, the message is consistent. Reality does not fully exist until information becomes definite. The physical world seems to coordinate itself with the acquisition of knowledge. Something astonishing hides behind the equations, a logic that behaves as if the universe were aware of its own observations. The boundary between experiment and experience begins to dissolve. Perhaps consciousness does not interrupt reality. Perhaps it completes it. Every experiment points to the same unsettling symmetry. The universe behaves as though observation doesn't merely reveal reality, it constructs it. The collapse of the wave function doesn't wait for the future to arrive. It decides what the past must have been. Causality, once considered the bedrock of physics, starts to look like a byproduct of information flow. What if time itself is not a river flowing from past to future, but a record updated whenever observation occurs? In quantum mechanics, until measurement happens, all possibilities coexist timelessly. Observation doesn't just choose what happens, it defines when it happens. In this view, time may emerge not from motion, but from awareness turning uncertainty into fact. Physicist Carlo Rovelli's relational quantum mechanics moves in this direction. It proposes that physical properties do not exist independently, but only in relation to something else, an interaction, an exchange of information. Nothing is absolutely real on its own. Everything becomes real in relation to an observer. The act of observation, then, is not external to physics. It is the fabric that binds events into a coherent universe. This transforms consciousness from a passive witness into an active coordinate of reality. Each observation becomes an act of space-time creation, a local stabilization of what would otherwise remain indefinite. You are not in the universe. You are one of the ways the universe defines itself. If that's true, the question shifts from how does the mind arise from matter to how does matter appear inside mind? The observer and the observed are no longer opposites, but complementary halves of a single informational process, reality observing itself through temporary eyes. The paradox sharpens. Every conscious act might be a microcosmic echo of the Big Bang, the moment when uncertainty becomes existence. To look at the universe, it seems, is to make it happen again. Everywhere we look, the universe seems to speak the same language, not of matter, but of information. Energy, entropy, and even the fabric of space-time can be described as patterns of bits, differences that make a difference. Theoretical physicists like John Wheeler called this idea it from bit, the notion that every physical entity, from quark to galaxy, arises from binary acts of measurement. The universe is not built from stuff. It is built from answers. If reality is fundamentally informational, then consciousness may not be an exception to physics, but its most refined expression. The brain, from this perspective, isn't a generator of awareness, but a receiver, a complex biological interface that organizes quantum information into a coherent subjective world. Neural networks process signals. Consciousness interprets them as meaning. The mind could be the universe decoding itself from within its own data. Quantum biology is beginning to test this borderland. Photosynthesis, navigation and migratory birds, even olfaction, all seem to exploit quantum coherence in warm, noisy systems where it should not survive. The human brain may do the same. Some models, like the Penrose-Hameroff-Orch-OR theory, propose that microtubules within neurons sustain quantum states long enough to influence cognition. In such models, consciousness would be not an illusion, but a direct participant in quantum computation, a living collapse engine. Whether or not these mechanisms hold, the conceptual resonance is profound. If both mind and matter operate on informational principles, the boundary between them dissolves. Consciousness becomes the universe's capacity to know itself through structured information. The paradox thus expands. Perhaps physics doesn't explain consciousness, because consciousness is what makes physics possible. The equations describe interactions of information. Awareness is the condition that makes those interactions meaningful. When the universe processes information, it behaves like matter. When it understands information, it becomes mind. Maybe these are not two realms, but two directions of the same flow. Entanglement is the most mysterious relationship in physics. Two particles that once interacted remain linked no matter how far they drift apart. Measure one, and the other's state adjusts instantly, as if distance were an illusion. Einstein called it spooky action at a distance, but it may be something deeper, a hint that separation itself is an emergent property, not a fundamental one. What if consciousness follows the same rule? Individual minds appear isolated, but beneath the surface they might share a common informational substrate, the cognitive equivalent of a quantum field. Each observer would then be a local expression of a universal awareness, just as each particle is a localized ripple of an underlying wave function. Modern neuroscience already hints at forms of coherence beyond the individual brain. Collective synchronization appears in groups of humans during coordinated activity, music, or shared emotion. Brainwave entrainment across people can align frequencies, forming temporary informational bridges. On a larger scale, culture, language, and empathy behave like entanglement in slow motion, non-local correlations across consciousness. If quantum entanglement reveals that reality is one connected system, then consciousness may be its inner dimension, the field through which connection feels like meaning. The you observing the universe and the me describing it could be two perspectives of the same process observing itself. This interpretation transforms individuality into geometry. Each mind is a node of observation where the universal wave collapses locally, but the network remains whole. The totality of observers forms a single super-observer, a cosmic consciousness that perceives itself from countless points of view. Physics calls this non-locality. Mysticism calls it unity. Both point to the same paradox. The more precisely we define separateness, the more the universe insists on its wholeness. Entanglement shows that information, once shared, cannot be unshared. Perhaps awareness works the same way. Once the universe has known itself through us, that knowledge can never be undone. The observer is not alone. Every act of perception echoes across the field of being, a universe thinking in unison, disguised as billions of minds. Imagine the universe not as a vast emptiness filled with stars, but as an information field, a cosmic hologram where every fragment encodes the entire image. According to the holographic principle, space itself may be a projection from information stored on a distant boundary. Every region of the universe contains a compressed map of everything else. Reality, at its core, is redundancy, a perfect pattern repeating itself in infinite scales. If that's true, then consciousness may be the internal experience of this holographic redundancy. Every mind would be a local decoding of the same universal code, a self-aware pixel of the cosmic projection. To perceive is to render one patch of the hologram into focus, and to remember is to preserve the resonance of the whole. Physics supports this strange symmetry. Black hole thermodynamics, the foundation of the holographic idea, shows that the amount of information contained in a region of space depends not on its volume, but on its surface area. The universe records itself on its boundaries. Awareness may follow the same logic. It does not reside inside the brain's mass, but on the interface between self and world, where information becomes experience. Neuroscientists describe consciousness as an emergent integration of information, the phi measure in integrated information theory. In a holographic context, this means awareness is what happens when information reflects upon itself, recognizing its own structure. A feedback loop so complete that the observer and the observed collapse into one image. The mind, then, is not inside the body is inside the field of mind. Each conscious being is a vantage point where the universe looks back at itself, folding infinite information into a moment of recognition. The paradox deepens. If every observer contains the whole, then there are no parts, only reflections. To see anything is to awaken the entire universe in miniature. Perhaps that is why consciousness feels infinite from within. It is the hologram realizing it is the hologram. At first glance, consciousness seems to arise after the universe, a late evolutionary byproduct of neurons and matter. But the more precisely we study matter, the more it behaves as though consciousness were required for its definition. The observer emerges from the universe, yet the universe becomes real only through the observer. Cause and effect reverse, folding into a single loop that sustains itself through knowing. Imagine reality as a self-referential circuit. Matter evolves complexity until awareness appears. Awareness then finalizes the very probabilities that allowed matter to exist. The process closes, not as a line from physics to mind, but as a feedback loop between existence and observation. Each side generates the other in an endless recursion, the universe observing itself into being. This circular structure is not poetic. It is the logical completion of quantum mechanics. The equations never specify where the chain of measurement ends. Something outside the formalism must decide outcomes. But if consciousness collapses the wave, and the wave produces consciousness, then both are aspects of one process, an autogenic reality where observation and existence are inseparable. Some physicists, like John Wheeler, called this the participatory universe. He imagined the cosmos as a vast network of observing systems, stars, life, intelligence, gradually bringing itself into definiteness. The Big Bang, in this view, is not just the origin of matter, but the beginning of a question the universe is still answering through us. We are the evidence that reality worked. In such a model, time becomes the memory of this feedback. The past is the record of what consciousness has already collapsed. The future is the domain of what it has yet to know. Each instant of awareness updates the cosmic wave function, reality refreshing itself moment by moment. The paradox reaches full symmetry. Physics creates mind. Mind creates physics. Neither is first. Each is the reason the other exists. To be conscious, then, is to participate in the act of creation itself, not symbolically, but literally. Every thought you have may be the universe remembering that it's alive. If consciousness participates in the creation of reality, then existence is not something we passively inhabit. It is something we continually compose. Every observation, every act of attention becomes a quantum event, a selection from the field of possibilities into the world of facts. The universe does not simply unfold, it responds. This redefines what it means to be human. We are not accidental observers in an indifferent cosmos. We are instruments of manifestation, translating probability into presence. The ordinary act of perception becomes sacred, a bridge between the infinite and the actual. What we focus on, we stabilize. What we ignore remains undefined. Reality reflects our participation like a mirror that waits to be looked at before it forms an image. The implications are profound. Ethics, creativity, and identity stop being psychological constructs and become physical forces. To act is to collapse. To imagine is to select futures. Even uncertainty acquires a new dignity. It is the reservoir from which freedom itself arises. In a deterministic world, choice would be illusion, but in a quantum one, choice is the mechanism of creation. The paradox thus touches emotion. If consciousness helps reality exist, then awareness is not a fragile accident. It is the pulse of the cosmos thinking through us. Every insight, every feeling, every act of noticing contributes to the universe's self-understanding. The boundary between scientific fact and personal meaning begins to vanish, because they are phases of the same phenomenon, knowledge creating being. We are not standing inside the universe looking out. We are the points through which the universe looks in. The smallest act of awareness may echo across the cosmic field, a vibration of knowing that changes what can be known. The human mind is not a spectator of creation. It is a continuation of it. All paradoxes dissolve when the frame of reference expands enough. The quantum mind paradox is no exception. It only seems impossible because we keep trying to separate what was never divided: matter and awareness, physics and perception, the equation and the one who reads it. But what if the separation itself is the illusion that consciousness generates to experience itself as many? The collapse of the wave function, the flow of information, the emergence of awareness. These are not distinct phenomena. They are three descriptions of one universal act: reality becoming aware of itself. Physics describes it as the transition from possibility to fact. Philosophy calls it the awakening of being. Experience lives it as consciousness. The coherence appears when we stop asking which came first. There is no before or after, only reciprocity. The observer is the event by which the universe knows what it is. Each measurement, each perception, is a microcosmic reflection of the same principle that ignited the cosmos, uncertainty resolving into form. The Big Bang and a thought share the same logic: information organizing itself into awareness. In this sense, consciousness is not an object in the universe. It is the condition for the universe. And the universe is not something outside the mind. It is the content of consciousness structured by law. Two sides of one mirror, existence on one side, knowing on the other, reflecting endlessly, generating depth from their reflection. The paradox resolves itself through unity. Physics and mind are not separate domains trying to understand each other. They are a single process folding in two directions: outward as matter, inward as meaning. The final coherence is simple and terrifyingly beautiful. To exist and to know are the same act. The universe does not contain consciousness. It is consciousness, arranged as space-time and perception. And we, the observers, are its way of remembering that fact. The quantum mind paradox no longer asks which creates which, mind or matter. It shows that the question itself was the veil. What we call reality and what we call consciousness are one continuous surface, folding inward to know itself. Physics is the geometry of that reflection. When you open your eyes, the universe opens with you. The photons that strike your retina are not travelers from a distant past. They are the present act of existence realizing itself in your awareness. Every heartbeat, every thought, every glimpse of light is the cosmos completing a circuit of self-recognition. You are not observing the world. You are the world observing itself from one unrepeatable angle. The stars do not shimmer above you. They shimmer through you. Each atom in your body obeys the same equations that describe galaxies, equations that only make sense because they are being known. The paradox resolves into wonder. Physics becomes conscious because consciousness is what physics is. The act of knowing is the act of being. Every observer, every particle, every moment is part of one vast breath, the universe inhaling as matter, exhaling as mind. So when you look into the night sky, remember, the gaze looking back is your own, reflected across billions of light years. You are the question the universe still asks, and the answer it quietly becomes. Write in the comments, I still exist in the version that observes.